Hello and welcome. My name is Michał Banasiak, and this is a series of talks about Polish-Czech relations within the Polish-Czech Forum project. Our guest is Maciej Ruczaj, director of Polish Institute in Prague. Could you briefly tell us about the daily activities of the Polish Institute in Prague? What do you do there?
One of the 27th, I think, Polish institutes all around the world, mostly in Europe. Polish institutes are institutions which form part of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and which are dedicated to the public and cultural diplomacy, which means we are not, or our primary target as a diplomatic mission are not other diplomatic missions, not the institutions of state government of the country we work in, but rather the public opinion of the country. Our aim is to promote Poland. Our aim is to create bonds between institutions and people, and our aim is to to provide a kind of good atmosphere for building all the other types of relations, meaning economic and political mainly. So that's the kind of general mission of Polish institutes and public diplomacy. In terms of Prague, of course, it is a huge number of bilateral and multilateral projects we are dealing with every year. It's more or less around 100 projects every year. Some of them, let's say half of them, are our own projects we initiate. The other half is something in which we help either Czech or Polish partners in creating some common enterprises. That's basically about our work. I would also add that we, of course, our main target is Prague as a capital city. That's the place we work normally, but our activities should cover the whole territory of the Czech Republic, and it's like more or less 30 to 40% of our activities is happening outside the capital.
You organize a lot of exhibitions, you organize a lot of events to promote Polish heritage. On what field do you focus? Is it tourism? Is it promoting Polish literature, Polish music, Polish cuisine maybe?
One of the great things about public diplomacy is that it's a kind of infinitely variable. Every day you do something else, and the scale, the scope of the activities is really wide. From working with mass media, sometimes with really kind of political issues, to promotion of culture, to tourism, and so on. So you always have to somehow try to think which way of reaching the public is the best in particular country, and which recipe for promoting Poland is the best. Polish Institute in Prague, in the last few years, I would say, make some kind of a strategic decision about concentrating on two issues. One of them was promotion of Poland as a tourist destination, because in our opinion, the main problem we have is with a so-called average Czech person, which has the highest number of negative stereotypes about Poland, and which considers Poland a kind of backward country which cannot offer anything interesting. So that was one kind of strategic decision to make this average Czech person travel to Poland and learn that their stereotypes are not compatible with reality. So that was strategic decision number one. Strategic decision number two was to concentrate to a great extent on issues connected with politics of memory and with history. Few years ago, I would say that the main stress was on the promotion, more of explanation of difficult chapters from Polish history connected to the World War II, connected, for example, to the negative myth of so-called Polish anti-Semitism, working with the Jewish community in Prague, showing the scope of destruction brought by the Second World War to Poland, showing the specific situation of Poland, vice versa, the alliance of two totalitarian regimes, meaning German and Soviet. That would be the main subjects we were dealing with. In the last 2, almost 3 years, there would be great stress on another subject, and this is what we in Poland call Central Eastern Europe. That is the subject of the historical and cultural heritage of Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, the cultural and historic heritage of the old Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which has, of course, obvious reasons connected with first with crisis in Belarus, then with war on Ukraine. And in this respect, I think that our institute did really a great job connected to the, well, educating Czech public in terms of history of this region, history which was completely unknown actually. Only with the war, with the Russian aggression on Ukraine, Czech public started to pay more attention to this region and started to explore the history of Ukraine, Belarus, kind of discovering the fact that this territory was not well, always within the Russian cultural sphere or Russian cultural influence. So this historic cultural issues provided kind of second pillar of our activity. Of course, we are not limiting our activities in terms of culture or promotion of Polish culture and arts. This is always important part of the activities of every Polish institute. But I think that in terms of contemporary art, the presence of Polish artists in the Czech context is satisfying. Cooperation between cultural institutions is also very wide, and that was one of the reasons why we could make this, I would call it, strategic decision to concentrate on tourism and history.
You have mentioned a few examples of the negative stereotypes of Poland, which are still circulating in Czechia, but you also mentioned that this is something that is changing. And do you think, can you see the intergenerational differences in receiving Poland? I mean, between people which were brought up in, for instance, 50s, 60s, and between the people which were brought up in 90s and later.
Well, the problem, of course, is that we don't have any kind of specialized research made on the perception of Poland in the Czech Republic. There were some but I don't think they are sufficient to make any science evidence-based judgments. But from my long perspective of serving here in Prague and dealing with Czech-Polish relations, I would say, first of all, from Polish perspective, we rarely realize how far we were in history, that our countries developed in completely different directions, and our kind of world perception of our place in the world were quite different. The events that brought us together were actually negative events, meaning being together put into this Soviet camp after 1945. This was the negative experience, but actually at the end, it created the sense of a bond between our countries. And it created, of course, a common starting point after 1989. And this is, of course, the heritage which we are drawing from since then. At the same time, it had a lot of negative effects. Mainly, I would argue that the huge problem is still the Czechoslovak communist propaganda from the 1980s, which was directed against the solidarity movement, which was directed towards, creating in the general Czechoslovak public the feeling that Poland is a country that deserves, that does not deserve attention, or which is highly untrustworthy. That Polish, for example, creating stereotypes of Polish products which are not reliable, creating stereotype of Polish entrepreneurs which are not reliable, creating stereotype of Poles who are lazy and don't want to work, and therefore they strike. And this propaganda was actually one of the biggest attempts of molding the public opinion against one of the neighboring countries in the history of Czechoslovak secret police. And unfortunately, it had and has some lasting effects. Now, at the same time, despite this many negative stereotypes, there is a change, and I would say that in the last few years this change is accelerating. And from my perspective, I view Polish-Czech relations in this from the perspective of public opinion in highly optimistic terms. There is a huge change connected to tourism, and to there is a huge rise of numbers of Czech visiting Poland and prizing Poland, changing their perception of Poland with this first-hand experience. Poland appears very often in the last few years as in Czech public debate as a I would say epitome of modernization. That is a huge change, because in the normal traditional Czech discourse, Poland was this backward Eastern country, and in the last few years it keeps reappearing that Poland, for example, do better in terms of building public infrastructure such as highways, that Poland do better in using European funds, that Poland is doing better in terms of digitalization, and so on. this brings a completely new perspective or new dimension to this Czech-Polish exchange, because as I said, for the last, I would say, 6 centuries at least, this was Czech lands were considered themselves more modernized, more Western than Poland, and Poland was viewed as this backward region. So this is something for a person like me, living in this Czech-Polish dialogue, Czech-Polish context for the last at least 15 years. It is a cosmic, really cosmic change happening. And the third issue, which definitely is changing perception of Poland, is the security. Poland is now perceived as a country, as a kind of cornerstone of NATO in the Central Europe, and as a country which is reliable and trustworthy in terms of security, and viewed as a kind of leader of the region in terms of security. This, of course, connects to Czech overall perception of security issues, very strong support of Ukraine, very strong support of NATO and transatlantic relations, which is to some extent the product of last few years, and which really helps to change the perception of Poland. Number 4 is connected, and this is I actually mentioned the fact that that Czech perception of the whole region of Central Eastern Europe is changing in connection to the Russian aggression, and they are now more perceptive to and more interested in the wider Central Eastern European region, more perceptive to what's happening in countries like Lithuania, not only Ukraine, but also Lithuania, Moldova, and so on, which of course, again, helps to rise the image of Poland as an important partner, because we do have higher amount of expertise on these countries, and we are perceived as a player in this respect, more than in traditional kind of vectors of Czech foreign policy, being Vienna, Berlin, and so on. So those 4 issues definitely, I think, change positively the perception of Poland, and change both in terms of well, the elites, the opinion making and decision making elites of the Czech Republic, and in the wider public opinion. And those changes really makes me feel that our work in the last years has some positive outcomes. Of course, they were wider political and other economic processes molding this perception, but I hope that our work as a Polish Institute in Prague somehow contributed to this positive trend.
You mentioned the security and also the Russian aggression on Ukraine, and I would like to ask you about to what extent do Polish and Czech people share the view on the war, because let's say 1 year ago we had a president of Czechia who was thinking positively about Russia. We observed also at least a few big marches in Prague with Russian flags waving among the protesters, and I remember that in Poland it was seen as a pro-Russian perception of the war. What do you think about the perception of the war among Czech community now?
The government of Petr Fiala, who is responsible for Czech foreign policy, from the very first moment of war, is very strongly on the same side of the barricade as Poland, and Czech-Polish cooperation was one of those important factors in creating the European response to the war. That's number one. Number two, Czech public opinion is, I think, from the very beginning, in a considerable majority on the same side of the barricade as the Polish society, very strongly supporting Ukraine, rising incredible amounts of private money in order not only to help the refugees but also to buy arms, which in my opinion is one of the signs of the attitude of the society towards the conflict, that not only we are helping the civilians and the casualties, but also helping Ukraine to win. This is a very important element of Czech public atmosphere in the months and years that followed the 24th of February 22. Of course, there is some part of society which, well, I would say, is negatively which has a negative attitude towards the current government, and because of government supports of Ukraine, thinks the opposite way or takes opposite stance. Of course, there is in Czech tradition of political thinking, there is this, I would say, Russophile tendency, which is connected to different historical experience of 19th century, connected to the fact that Czech lands or Czech national movement was directed against the German influence, and therefore tended to view Russia as a kind of Slavic language country, as a kind of ally in this respect. But I would say that in Polish perception, in Polish discourse, these Russophile tendencies of the Czech society are overestimated. And not only in the last almost 2 years or year and a half since the beginning of Russian aggression, on a full-scale aggression on Ukraine, but also in the long term. I think that the moment when the somehow definite change in Czech perception of Russia occurred was 1968. And if we compare Czech attitudes to 1945 and 1968, we can see how traumatic and how decisive this moment was for the public perception of Russia and Czech-Russian relations. Of course, this is a long process. Those Russophile tendencies are very deeply ingrained, and it took a long time to actually to start the discussion also about 1945, because for a long time, even in last, well, 2 decades, let's say, there was a tendency to divide good Russian presence in 1945 and bad one in 1968 or after, and after. Nowadays, there is a huge amount of relativization of this 1945 moment, a huge discussion about this. We saw Marshal Konev's statue dismantled before the war started. Marshal Konev being the leader of the Ukraine front, which took Prague in May 1945. So I would say that Czech society in majority is now deeply distrustful towards Russia, is deeply conscious of the fact that NATO is a cornerstone of Czech security, is deeply concerned with what's happening in Ukraine, is deeply on the side of Ukraine in this conflict. But of course, there might be some differences in the amount of or in the opinions how deep Czech involvement in the conflict should be. Of course, Czech Republic is further away from Ukraine than Poland, so those immediate security threats are probably less pressing on the society as a whole. So there would be a bigger gap between people who support Ukraine and support, for example, refugees, and those who would argue for, Czech arms being sent to the front line. But altogether, I think that war in Ukraine, or the Russian aggression on Ukraine, is one of the factors that also contributed to the Czech-Polish relations, not only on the level of the governments, but also on the level of societies. And it helped check this positive trend in perception of Poland, because Czech society as a majority is on the same side of the barricade.
Thank you very much. The guest of the Institute of New Europe was Maciej Ruczaj, director of the Polish Institute in Prague.
Thank you very much.